Hello and welcome back to How to Teach the Bible, a preaching class. Let's go ahead and just dive in. We talked about sermon ideas, which is one simple sentence. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that one simple sentence. And we are now moving into division statements. What are division statements? Well, I've already kind of alluded to it before, but we're just going to talk about it now. If your sermon idea was your main point, and as I said, we're going to start moving away from the term points, but for the sake of clarity, I'm just using the term points. Um, if our sermon idea is our main point, then our division statements would be our sub points. Now let me ask you, you have your main point and your sub points. What is most important? That's right, your main point. If something were to get lost in translation, what is more important? A main point or sub points? That's right, your main point. Because your sub points only serve your main point. So our division statements are not more important to be communicated than our sermon idea. Our division statements can be lost. Our sermon idea cannot. Our division statements can be skipped over. Our sermon idea cannot. Our sermon idea is the one non negotiable thing that we are seeking to communicate to our audience. That being said, our division statements are going to build up our case for why our sermon idea is so important and why we want them to walk away from it. Because our sermon idea is derived from the text, as we talked about, from the textual idea to the sermon idea, it's all from the text. So too will our subpoints or our division statements. I have here three division statements. And as I said before, our preaching is kind of based off of the 3 point sermon. So we have 3 points, and to be frank, 3 points is very often the amount that we end up with in the text. But that is not a hard rule. Sometimes there's only 2 points in a text. Sometimes there's 4 points, maybe even five, which is really rare. But there are even cases, and I've preached a few, in which I did a 1 point sermon. Let me ask you, if it's a 1 point sermon, which point am I preaching? My sermon idea. And so my 1 point of my sermon is my sermon idea. And so for the entire text, I'm more of pointing out my sermon idea through the text. I'm working in the nuances of the text regarding my sermon idea. And I'm showing how we've developed into our sermon idea for the entire sermon. But it's a 1 point sermon, which is my sermon idea, because it's my main point. If I only have 1 point, it's the main point. So you can have a 1 point sermon too, uh, but we're not choosing that, right? I don't come to the text saying I want to do a 1 point sermon, and I'm not coming to the text saying I want to do a 5 point sermon. I'm coming to the text and I'm looking at it and I'm seeing how many points are there in this passage. So we have our division statements, which are kind of our subpoints, and they are going to be derived from the text as well. In the last video, we were working with the sermon idea, and and as I would chose the passage, it was really short. Did I misspell that? I actually was spelling it from the small screen that I'm looking at, not the bigger screen that's over here. Um, that's our oh that's the title. That's all right. So that's the passage, and then we'll title it later. So Control E. Oh, that's right. This is a Word document. I'm used to Word. Alrighty. Yeah, that's how we'll fix it. Cool. So we have the title there. So as we were working through the sermon idea, we came to this sermon idea, which is one that I will just copy and paste over here. And then we'll do it here too. So this is our sermon idea, and I'm going to go ahead and bold that and bring it to about 16. And then we have our division statements. So now we want to kind of back this up, right? I think this is going to be a good way to kind of go through the entire series, filling in the stuff. So we're going to go ahead and use Galatians as our sample for this. And hopefully that'll serve some good. It's a very short passage, and I wasn't expecting to do this, but I think this will be a good thing to illustrate what exactly we're doing. So our division statements are essentially as we go through the text, and you know what I'll do? I will make myself smaller. There we go. Alrighty. So now I'm just over here in the corner. No other gospel. Alrighty. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and look at the text. We're going to look at the text and we're going to look for breaks in the text. Sort of breaks in ideas, breaks in things that are being communicated in our passage that we are hoping, that Paul is hoping our audience to see as he's sort of navigating this. That's one thing I'll say about epistles. This isn't the preaching an epistle videos. We haven't gotten there yet. But one thing I'll tell you about epistles is they're very logical. They're very logical. The person is trying to write a letter to communicate an idea to his audience, to the recipients of the letter. And so he's not being illogical and he's not ranting. He's trying to communicate. And when we try and communicate, we do things like illustrations to kind of elaborate on our points and show that they are true. We communicate our messages. We use logical flow. We argue through a series of statements. And so epistles do that as well. In fact, that's what they are, which is why they're so easy to preach from. So we're going to go ahead and look at this and see, what's going on here. What are the arguments? What is he doing to essentially teach us this sermon idea? Well, the textual idea, but we have it as the sermon idea now. So as I was working through this passage and I was reading it with you guys in the last video, one thing I noticed is I am astonished that you guys are so quickly deserting him who called you into the grace of Christ, are turning to a different gospel. And then he says this, which is sort of a parenthetical note. It's sort of like a note that he adds in under his breath. Well, not that there is another gospel, but this is sort of a contrast. He's saying you guys have turned to another gospel, but then he says something else to elaborate. Not that there is another gospel, but that there are some who trouble you that distort the gospel. And then he moves into this, but even if another angel should preach a gospel contrary to him, let him be accursed. And then he sort of repeats it here. So we have a little bit of a twist and turn here. And I think that would be good to kind of bring to the forefront here. As he says, I'm astonished that you guys are so quickly deserting him who called you to the grace. Let's just kind of throw some stuff down. Deserting the gospel. Okay. And then the second thing is not that there is another gospel. Fake gospels. But even if an angel should preach you, we or an angel should preach you a gospel contrary, let him be accursed. Maybe let's talk about I don't want to say fake teachers. It doesn't really grab. I'll write fake teachers for now. But that doesn't really communicate well what exactly Paul is saying. He's not talking about fake teachers. He's talking about people that are trying to manipulate and persuade you. And so fake teachers kind of covers it, but it doesn't really capture it. But for the sake of trying to get through this in a reasonable amount of time, for this video, that's what we'll call it. And so you can kind of see we have deserting the gospel, we have fake gospels are real, and then we have fake teachers. Gosh, the fake teachers is really bugging me, but I'll probably think up of a better way to phrase that in the next one. If not that communicates what we're looking for. But as you can see, these division statements, and I'll go ahead and delete this now. Our DS1, our division statement 1, they are derived from the text, and we got to see the message of the text, which was in the previous one. So if you haven't seen that, definitely go to that one first and then come back here. But then as we analyze the text, we start to see that there are some things being communicated here that build up to our text, that build up to our sermon idea, which is the whole point of this entire text. It's the whole point of this paragraph. So that's essentially how we get our division statements. And that's why they're called division statements. They're divisions in the text. When you start writing an essay, right, and your teachers start to teach you how to write essays or, essays, long papers and stuff, one of the things that they'll tell you is your paragraph should essentially be one point. And one of the basic ways you do it is your first sentence will be your thesis statement. It's the point that you're trying to say. It's the topic of that paragraph. But then in your following sentences, you might have something like an illustration. You might have something like the substance, which is, the statistical data or something like that that backs up your point. And then you might have a little bit of argumentation or anything like that. Maybe someone pushing back on your point, and then why they're wrong. That's a bit more complex. You might even break that up into a couple, because the pushback might be its own paragraph. But the general gist is you communicate one point, and then you have things to back up that point in just one paragraph. So you communicate your thesis, you communicate the topic of that paragraph. You illustrate it, you back it up with data, and you might even say why it's important. And then you move on to your next point or your next topic in your paper as you're building the overall message of your paper, which is your paper's thesis. So it's the same thing here. What we are analyzing at the start, if we're going to just keep this at a paragraph level, is our sermon idea is the topic or the point of the paragraph. And our division statements are noticing all the little things about that are the divisions. The statistical data is its own division. The illustration is its own division. This is its own division. And so we can see how the text is kind of flowing and doing what it does. And that's what we're noticing. So we're dividing the text into its subpoints that build the main point. So we are identifying our division statements, and we've acknowledged the sermon idea or the textual idea. And so that's, I believe, how we got to this, which I think effectively communicates it. And we are building a sermon from this. All right, so I think that's a good sort of illustration as we're working through this template. I will catch you guys in the next one.